Welcome to Music City Fitness with your hosts Josh Gamble and Kat Beach, talking real deal health and wellness and, well, all around body talk. Their friends and colleagues from across the globe are here to share their views with you too. It's just another day in the journey, so grab a drink and a bite to eat and hang with them for a while as they open up new ideas for you.
The why, necessarily the when, but definitely the what and the why when it comes to health and wellness, and so much more change. Gosh, we called it Music City Fitness, but we are finding that we're bringing so many people on with so many different energy sources in their life that we're just really thrilled, So please subscribe and hit that little bell at the side, and that should immediately bring up our live cast when we're here. I think we need to hit like and
subscribe and like.
The other ones? What's the other one?
Subscribe and like.
Subscribe. That's it. Okay, we're in it to win it. Subscribe and like, and we're in it to win it. And that's it with all the intros, because that's the one thing that I always like to get straight to to the talent on the show, and I never give us promo, and so I'm glad I'm doing that now. Tonight we're really, really blessed to have a special guest. Her name is Addison Darrow, and you know what, Addison, is it Darrow or Darrow?
It's Darrow.
Okay, yay! Okay. And, this is a really amazing evening because we're going to talk about some things that are challenging. A lot of people have some difficult times with talking about these out-of-the-box experiences in life, and I'm really thrilled. And I know Josh is really thrilled that you're here to talk so openly. I could not think of a more outstanding person to talk about it. So welcome. Thank you. Thank you for coming on to talk about transgender and really talk about your journey. Thank you. Blessing.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you so much to both of you for having me. It's really a joy. I tend to learn more about myself and everything as each time that I get to share, and especially with questions that folks ask. So it's just a real pleasure to be here. You all are amazing. So thank you for doing this, and thank you for having me.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Hey, tell me something. Oh, and Precious wants to know too, if you didn't hear her bark in the background, that's a baby girl. How long have you known that you wanted to be you know what? I don't want to say wanted to be.
Well, okay, so go with that. So I think that I think what you're doing is perfect, because I think a lot of us don't know the proper verbiage.
Yeah, you're right. There we go.
Say. So what if we just kind of went with what we were going to say, and then ask and correct us if you don't mind on, it's usually explained this way or it's said this way, because I think the question you're trying to get out is when did you know that you were a transgender? When did you know that you were a woman? Not when did you decide? But I think as long as, for those who don't know, I've worked with Addison for a while now at Barry's boot camp. And the most common thing I see is when people are like him instead of her, or he instead of she.
Yeah.
And then once you learn, you're like, oh, then it becomes like repetition. But while we're going, because we definitely want to hear your journey, your story, when you kind of realized that something was different, what kind of helped you sort of go that way, what steps, and then what maybe are some common things or misconceptions people have when it comes to things they say, maybe not meaning to,
Sure.
Maybe they're just undereducated on it.
Sure. Absolutely. And before I kind of dive into this, I would say just for, everything that I mentioned, it of course is my experience. This is my story. There are a lot of similarities through a lot of the narratives of trans and non-binary folks, but no two people, no two stories are exactly alike. So I just want to say that first, if I say something that sounds like it's more of a blanket statement, it's not used, it's not the end all be all. That is my experience. That is where I'm coming from. That's all. I just want to put that out there first, so we don't get any lines crossed there. As far as that question, that is a question I get very, very frequently. When did you know? And realistically, it's a near impossible question to answer in a lot of ways, just because, especially in my journey, I didn't come out until just a couple of weeks ago, 2018. So I've only been out publicly as trans for just over 2 years now.
So as we're going, I just feel like instead of maybe like hesitating and not sure what to say, maybe go with it. And then you can just have Addison kind of correct. It's like, okay, I hear what you're saying. Now, technically, this is the term it's called, or this is the words you would use. Because I think a lot of us just don't know, especially in this part of town, this part of the country, it's still new. It's not like you're in a bigger city like New York or LA where it's something that people are well versed in. So I just figured just have everybody ask whatever questions they want. Stick with the terms that they think they know, and then if they're wrong, they can be corrected. Because I think it's a good education lesson for everyone to kind of know exactly what's proper, what's maybe not improper, but what's like the technical term or like verse you would use or verbiage you would use.
Yeah, and I mean that's as you mentioned, that's very much the real life situation. That's my everyday. Is exactly that, is running into that, and we always wonder if we're going to get, we call it misgender. I was about to put it in quotes. There's no need. It's a real thing. But see, I just did it to myself, which happens all of the time. But yeah, we call it misgendering. And that is to be, referred to or called a gender pronoun that is not accurate for us. And even real quick, tangent of a tangent there. That's another question that has recently gotten some kind of an update to its wording. We used to hear the question, what are your preferred pronouns? And it is kind of generally accepted now that the word preferred has been dropped from that inquiry. And that's simply because it implies that any part of, a person's identity is a choice, and it's not when it comes to these things. This is just, it's what are your pronouns, and it's not a rude question to ask. It's not an invasive question to ask. I would really like to encourage anybody who's ever wondered if it's okay to ask that. Yes. Yes. If somebody doesn't want to tell you, they won't tell you. They don't want to have that conversation with you, they won't have it. But if you need to know that for your own self, so that when you do converse with them, you don't offend anybody. Everybody says, well, I'm worried if I ask that, it'll be offensive. What will be more offensive is if you choose to not ask, thusly choosing to kind of remain ignorant of what that person's pronouns are. And you continue to misgender them when there was always an opportunity to become educated, even for just that moment, even if you're strangers.
That's so important for you to say, seriously, because there have been, just as something to, an equal to that, I remember when I worked with the deaf community, there were so many times when we would be uncomfortable. This is not at the same angle, but certainly we would be uncomfortable if we met them or somebody who was outside of the community that we were working with in Connecticut, and to communicate. Sometimes there's a communication barrier because of uncomfort with not them, self and how we're going to feel with our communication. And I recall 2 separate times when I wanted to say hello in sign language, and I felt a sense of uncomfort, which was bizarre because I shouldn't have felt that way. So to be able to break down the barriers, to be able to communicate is really valuable. That's, by the way, why I stopped the show a second ago, because I want to make sure that this is heard. I think it's tremendously valuable.
Right. No, and I sincerely appreciate that. And it is interesting, and I understand why sometimes people consider there to be kind of gray areas, because no, you are not allowed by social standards to walk up to another person and say, are you a boy or a girl? Are you a man or a woman?
Yeah.
It is understood that that is not how we interact with folks. However, asking about pronouns is the acceptable way of doing that, because what you're kind of getting at there is you're getting at the person's identity. You're getting at their soul. The first question is really still rooted in a question of biological and anatomical sex. That's really what you're asking about. And then, of course, that, opens up the whole idea of sex and gender are two different things. They are, by definition, two completely separate and different things. And that's kind of that, which just kind of, there's a really great story about an interaction that I had with a young child, I think about 6 or so years old. And we were doing an event at work, and I was there, and I was wearing, like a workout skirt, a skort, and a crop sweatshirt, and I had my hair up, very on brand for me. And this little girl was just staring at me with kind of a perplexed face. And I love kids. I adore them. And I said hi, and I complimented her shoes because they were glittery and fabulous. And she eventually just looked at me and said, "Are you a boy or a girl?" And I looked down at her and I said, "I'm a girl. Thank you for asking." And she continued to stare at me. And I said, "Do I look different for a girl?" And she stared for another couple seconds and then just went, "Huh," and ran away and went on with her day. And that was it. That was the entire interaction. And so I know I just said, no, you can't go up to people and ask, "Are you a boy or a girl?" We as social adults understand that. In that case, though, with that kid, she was just processing. I mean, it's what kids do. They assess the world around them. They want to know because it's their environment. It's a defense mechanism. It's about safety for them. Yeah. And that's all that she was doing in that moment, was figuring out the world around her. I was in the world around her. She didn't quite know, but she was getting mixed signals, probably because, maybe she thought my face looked a little more masculine, but I was wearing a skirt and a cropped shirt, and mixed signals. That's what kids do. They process. Yeah. And that was where that led her. And in that interaction, that did not offend me. That 6-year-old child in glittery saddle shoes did not ruin my day by asking me that. Yeah. And so that just is an example to me of, this idea that it's not complicated. Yeah. For as many questions as people have, which is totally valid, and I want people to ask those questions, it's not as muddled and muddied as a lot of folks, I think, initially think that it may be.
And I'll throw this, and I told Josh this earlier.
I'm still Josh.
I'm sorry, Josh. Jim, Josh, Jason.
I've been called worse.
Okay, well, I'm going to stick with Jim. So Jim, I'm just kidding. I was telling Josh this earlier. It happens on lots of different levels, which is, it really says a lot about what we are teaching our kids. So I was in Los Angeles, and I was in the heart of my bodybuilding days, and I had a short skirt on, relative hair to here, but very, very muscular legs and muscular arms, and my nieces and nephews, and they were very, very young, and their mom was a model, stunningly beautiful, but very, very thin. And in a room full of adults, which is interesting to see the uncomfort of the adults, but really the innocence of a child. So it's the same thing. She looked at me and she said, "Can I ask you a question?" And I said, "Yes." She goes, "Are you a boy or a girl?" And that was simply because I was a female with muscles, and she was not used to seeing muscles on a female physique. So it's very interesting how our children have been taught specifics about it. It's interesting. So yeah, I'm throwing that in there because it happens on both angles, but I'm sure that Yeah. I said,
Yeah.
I'm a girl with muscles. I mean,
Right. Well, I mean,
all
and
the adults were
that's
like,
exactly it. Yeah. And that child was just kind of mapping that situation and mapping their surroundings, couldn't quite put it all together. But
yeah.
that
Let
is
me ask you a
actually,
question real quick.
yeah.
So since we're on the kids topic, I'll ask this one,
Yeah.
and then I would like to be able to go back to the beginning of when you decided to come out, how long you've been
That's right from the,
open about it. But so I sometimes feel that we get, I'll get questions like, and we had mentioned before, we've worked together for a while now at Barry's. And so, and I've been there for a long time, and I know a lot of the clients there. And so like, they'll come up and they might ask me a question, and, you've had people who have said, well, what if there's a restroom question. Which restroom do we do? What if my child's in there? What do I tell my child? And it's like, well, do you have to tell them anything? I mean, what's the age of your child? But I feel like, and it could be, this is just my opinion, that sometimes people are hiding behind their children as an excuse of what to say because they don't know. So instead of saying, hey, what's something I can say to my child? Instead of saying, well, what my child is not going to know what to think. And it's like, well, do they know what to think? So when you answer that, can you also tell the story you mentioned about I think it was the England, it was the lady in England, the transgender woman in England whose picture went viral. Kind of explain that. Then after that, can we go back to the beginning on your
journey through? Yeah.
Journey through. Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when it comes to the bathroom question, the locker room question, which, excuse me, is another one that I get all of the time. And it's one that we're faced with just because it has gotten so much attention in the news, and this has been an ongoing struggle for trans folks. It's a state by state mandated law right now, basically whether or not a person is legally allowed to use the restroom or facilities that is in line with their gender identity or their biological assigned at birth sex, which even if when you say it, those are two different things. So how could you possibly really make that distinction into law? But that is exactly what's been happening. When it comes to that situation, it's tough. I struggled for a long time with that part of it, because you feel like you're constantly at risk of running into that situation. You don't want to do that. You don't want to go use the restroom and have somebody call you out and have somebody complain to management, for lack of a better phrase, about your just trying to exist.
Addison, Addison, I hate to interrupt you, but
no.
Let's go deeper into what that real conversation is. Because when it comes down to it, you're there to go to the bathroom. Okay,
right.
I'm going to call out what we can't say this on Fox, NBC, ABC, or any of the major networks. I'm just going to call it. You're there to tinkle. I mean, it's very, or whatever it is, you're there to maybe take a shower or whatever, but you're there to go to the bathroom. And instead of us seeing this as an understanding of you're there to go to the bathroom, it has become, I'm believing, sexualized. And so please speak to that, because we need to put, that's what's making the parents and everybody go completely nuts. You're there to go look at somebody else's something or other. That is what's going through their mind, Addison, which is not the case, I know, but can you please speak to that? Matter of fact, that's the most valuable thing you can say.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, that's, you called it exactly what it is, which is what we need to do, that we are there to use the bathroom. And the concept that, excuse me, that folks are going through the process, of medically transitioning and publicly transitioning to gain some advantage of getting to use the other gender's restroom. I don't know what that is. And people start to claim issues of pedophilia and all these things. those things already exist. There are really terrible people doing terrible things out there in the world. They are not the trans community as a whole. We are not a perverted group of people. It is kind of unfathomable to me where that really came from and how that manifested. Especially because from our perspective, I say our, I mean, especially my own, I can speak to, that experience of simply going to the bathroom, there was a good chunk of my life where that was actually genuinely a horrifying experience. And it affected my life in really, really huge ways. I would work entire shifts without using the restroom because I didn't feel safe using either gendered restroom. Or, I felt like if I went into the men's room, but I was wearing makeup and a hair bow, well, now there's a girl in the guy's room. That doesn't really fly. Or, except that it does all the time. Girls use the men's room all the time very casually because the women's room has too long of a line. I get it. That's a very real thing. So you want to talk about your double standard. But I didn't feel safe using the designated men's room. And then I also didn't feel safe using the designated women's room, even, like I said, even in places that I worked, because you then always worry, who's going to say something? Who's going to walk out and say, oh, I felt uncomfortable because of that person, because that man was in the women's room with me. And if you do follow that conversation and that quote unquote complaint to its only logical conclusion, which is that there isn't a logical conclusion, that person comes out and says, I was uncomfortable because that man was in the women's room. Hopefully, the workplace says, I don't know what you're talking about. Right. That's not a man. You've got your wires crossed. I don't know what's happening. There's that. What we are seeing, though, and this is where another level of that kind of fear and anxiety comes in, is from a legal standpoint. And Tennessee is actually a prime example of just how dangerous this thinking can be. In the state of Tennessee, this was passed last year, kind of very quietly, in a public facility with designated individual stalls, which is basically any public restroom. If an individual 13 years of age or younger feels that they are unsafe because of another person in that same general public facility, and they bring that case to a court, the person being accused cannot use gender dysphoria, again, the medical condition of being trans, as a viable defense. That is written. Yeah. And when this was passed, there was a lot of backlash, but from the side that passed it, it was a lot of saying, oh, well, this is to protect against pedophilia, and this is to protect against, of men using the women's room. This isn't about trans folks. And it seems, of course, extremely and only targeted towards trans folks. Because in all of the cases, if we look at them of pedophilia and people doing terrible things, the first line of defense in a trial for those usually isn't this person identifies as the opposite gender. Right. That's usually not where we're at. Yeah. And so to put something like that into law is just really terribly dangerous and so misguided. And it only furthers the misconceptions that we already face. So there are places, there are a lot of places that have started to do gender neutral restrooms. It's the easiest solution you could possibly think of. I heard somebody say a while ago, if you have a problem with gender neutral bathrooms, it's the same one that's in your house. Your house is gender neutral, one would hope. And so that's a really simple solution. And then, the other solution is kind of what you had pointed out earlier, that there is no need for a solution. We're there to go to the bathroom,
Yes.
just like anybody else.
Yeah.
It frustrates me to no end because we have sexualized so much, and maybe it's because of some of the bad things that have happened. I'm sure it is. But my goodness, I mean, you get to a point where you go, stop the insanity. That's it's frustrating. So, and it happens with homosexuality versus
absolutely.
Everything is sexualized, and
absolutely. Yeah, it's the same. You get very similar misconceptions and prejudices based off of these just kind of completely ignorant ideas that a man who identifies as gay in a men's locker room is there to look at other men. That's just nope.
So many things
there
I'd like
change.
to say, probably the truth is
just there to change, and that's really
take a shower, get on out, and go to work. I mean, wait.
Yeah, it's not. So it's there are definitely some through lines. But yeah, it's like I said, there are a lot of places that are really trying to do the right thing, and I will say that it's because when I say I know I was mentioning sometimes that I was at work and having difficulty with this general scenario, and I just want to say where I work now, that is not the case.
Yeah,
and this was not the experience, and it's nothing but supportive where I'm at now, and so it's a non-issue for me personally, but I do recognize that is a very privileged position to be in, because I've been in plenty of situations in a store or in a restaurant or in other places of business that I've been in, where it's been a real problem, and it's really affected my entire life. So yeah.
I think it's one of those little things that we just take for granted. You get up, you go use the restroom. It's 99.9% of the time you're going there just use the restroom. I mean, that's it. I mean, whether you need to go to blow your nose or change a baby's diaper, something like that, but like 99% of the time you're just going to use the restroom. But yet, like Cal saying, we've made it such a perverse thing, and it's like when you were talking about like the pedophilia, like that's going on already. Like that's not to think, and maybe I'm wrong, to think that that someone's going to go through this process to justify being in a restroom area with someone of that gender. Like that's so extreme to me.
Yeah.
But I think that's part of why I like that we're doing this, because I think some people they're just uneducated on it. Like I said, it's such a Nashville's a little bit different than the state of Tennessee, and I think we've got so many people that are moving here from the West Coast, a lot from California. So it's a little different out there. I mean, it's more acceptable. Everything, people just don't care. Everyone just wants to live their life. Everyone's just trying to enjoy themselves. And I had someone ask me like, well, what do you think about this? And I was like, about what? And they're like, Addison is, being transgender. I'm like, what do you mean? Why do I like, I love Addison's one of the most amazing people I've had the chance to meet and be around. I was like, but whether Addison is a woman or a male or transgender or bisexual or whatever, that doesn't change anything for me. I still wake up. I still go to sleep the same. I still put my clothes on the same way. Like that doesn't do, but I think people they get so caught up in some things they've either created in their mind, some stuff they've seen on TV, which is all just, brought to a certain point by whether it's the way it's produced or done, or there's always like a one side to it. But I think it's tough here sometimes for that, but I do appreciate where we work. It doesn't matter who you are, where you're from, everyone's just accepted. We want you to come in, get a workout in. We're there for that reason. But before we got off on like this tangent,
you're gonna say
can we go back to your journey, like where it started?
Can we do a quick shout out to the people in the chat room? there's some new people that came in. I'm sorry, we want to go back to that, but we're here, and they may not know that, with Addison Darrow, who is transgender, but really an extraordinarily beautiful woman. And we're really proud to have her on. And for anybody who has questions, please feel free to ask us anything. I just want to do a quick shout out because they're brand new in the chat room. Go on.
Thank you for that.
Shout out.
I'm honored.
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me. And yeah, to kind of circle back around to what we had started talking about a little while ago, with just kind of my knowing and my journey with coming out and everything like that. It was a very long process. Now, a lot of my realizations about realizing, came kind of retroactively when I started to experience feelings of dysphoria, what I now know to call dysphoria. I didn't have that word in my vocabulary. I didn't even have the word trans or transgender.
Can you elaborate on that for people who don't understand that terminology?
Sure. Yeah. Gender dysphoria is essentially defined as, an individual, a condition in an individual whose gender identity, which is what the brain knows the person's gender to be, male, female, non-binary. It is a binary spectrum. Male and female are the two binary ends of that. So that identity does not match the identity associated with the biological sex of that person. Also, what we sometimes call cisgender folks, cisgender people. Those are people, CIS, it's an abbreviation. Cisgender people are people whose gender identity in their brain matches and lines up with their biological sex. So that's just kind of the different, cisgender, transgender. Those are opposites essentially. And so yeah, dysphoria is.
Time that happens.
What's that?
Is there a specific time that happens in your life, or is it just?
No, it's really, really, it's very, very individual, very subjective. I will say that in a lot of trans folk stories and narratives, we see it happening at an early age, at least kind of signs of it, for lack of a better term. And it's just because there's a certain point in most people's lives when they start to be, they start to get introduced to the ideas of gender, and that there are two genders, which we know scientifically there are many, many more than two genders. But it's when boys get blue and girls get pink, and boys get trucks and action figures and girls get dolls and dresses. And I know that sounds like very heteronormative and very kind of baseline, but that is exactly it. And that is, that's how kids are raised so often, with these very polarizing ideas. You look at clothes, and, boys get jeans and t-shirts. Like I said, girls get dresses and skirts. The materials are different, the colors, everything. So we start to train children really, really early on to recognize that these things are different and that they are one or the other. And at that age, we're training them to believe that it's not up to them, and that, not to say that it's a choice that didn't, but to say that it's predetermined based on a physical attribute that they were born with, not something that's in their brain. And just to touch on that really quickly, there have been numerous studies done of of brain scans of transgender individuals compared to brain scans of cisgender individuals, or again, folks whose gender identity matches up with their biological sex. It's, about 95% of the time, the brain of a transgender woman looks more like the brain of a biological woman than that of a biological man. And vice versa with the brain of a trans man, again, somebody who is assigned female at birth and transitioned to male, their brain will more closely resemble that of a biological man. So it just, really kind of solidifies that, not to be crass, but what's between our legs is not the determining factor here.
Right.
And that's that. And it's certainly a minority. Cisgender folks are the majority, but this is not new. This is not unheard of. And we've been around.
Yeah.
So as far as when I kind of knew, I kind of go back to about being 9 or 10 years old. And I was doodling on my notebooks, as any good kid would do. And I started to draw the kind of classical, male and female symbols, the circle, and then the male's got the arrow, and the female symbol has the kind of upside down cross, if you will. I know there are technical terms for that, and I totally don't know what they are, I admit. But those classic symbols for male and female. And I started to draw them, but just with one circle. And that's what I was doing. I literally, it is doodled all over tons and tons of things that I owned when I was a kid, like 9 or 10 years old. And I didn't know what it meant. It just made sense to me. I knew what the symbols individually meant. I didn't really know that there was any implication to me drawing them as I was. I got that design as a henna tattoo when I was 11 years old. I don't know who let me do that, but I did. And I remember, kind of feeling like I had to put it into words, why that meant something to me, why I kept drawing that. And the only thing that I could really come up with was that I felt just as in touch with my feminine side as I did with my masculine side. And it's not that that was wrong. That was the only way I could describe it then. That is how I felt then. I eventually looked up what that symbol meant. At the time, it was generally accepted that that was the symbol for transgender. And I read that, and I remember thinking, that's not me. But this symbol still makes sense to me. I'm not transgender. Life moves on. I maintained that narrative for years. I actually have that symbol permanently tattooed on my body now. And even when I got that tattoo, that was before I came out. And I basically used the same kind of story for it, the same justification for it, was that I feel really in touch and close with both of these sides of me, and these different aspects of me, and that was enough. That satisfied my brain, and that was it.
Was there a deciding moment? Can you pinpoint a moment when you went, you know what?
Sure.
100% me, and this is going to be me now, right now.
Yeah. It's there was an evening where I was getting ready to go out. I was going to go meet some friends. At this time, I had been out for about 2 years as genderqueer and gender fluid, which real quick simply means that your gender identity, you recognize it as existing kind of floating in between that binary that we talked about. And it manifests very differently for different people. For me, it really meant that most of the time I was perfectly cool presenting, masculine, presenting as a man. I wore suits, I had facial hair, so on and so forth. But then I really wanted and needed to occasionally present female and shave and put makeup on and wear girls' clothing and things like that. And that, again, kind of satisfied me for a long time, for like 2 years. And I would do that publicly, and they were almost kind of different people, for lack of a better description.
Yeah.
But there was a night where I realized that wasn't okay anymore. And that wasn't enough. And it was because I was getting ready, and it was a night where I was going to be more femme presenting. So I got myself all ready. I was like really pumped to go out and hang out with my friends. We were going to trivia. It was going to be great. And I looked in the mirror, do my check before I leave, didn't love it. I didn't know if it was the outfit, but it wasn't right. So I changed, tried something different, didn't love it again. And it was that second time that I could kind of start to feel like this isn't the look that's wrong. This isn't, you know, the shirt's too boxy or I need a hat or whatever. There was something felt very different about that time. But I kind of kept trying to change just the exterior. I probably changed outfits and looks 4 or 5 more times. At one point I wiped off my makeup and, okay, maybe I was wrong. This isn't a girl night, you know, I'm going to present mask, and I don't know, things were just crossed. Not the case. That definitely didn't work. So you get to a point where nothing that you can put on outside and present on the exterior is good anymore. Nothing works, nothing feels right. And you take everything off and you get to a point where you can't take any more off. And then I started, and this is all literally, I'm standing in front of my mirror while this is happening, and I started to see my body in a very different way and my face in a very different way. And you kind of step outside of yourself. And I didn't recognize what I was looking at anymore. It wasn't my own face. It wasn't my own body. I was disgusted by it, quite frankly. I didn't like how broad my shoulders were. I didn't like that I could see 5 o'clock shadow, even though I had just shaved. I didn't like anything that I was looking at. My hands were too big. You start to notice these things you've never even thought of. Yeah. And it's really, really unnerving and really terrifying to not recognize your very own reflection. I went to Instagram right after that, and I started scrolling through, you know, my posts, and they all looked foreign. And it was really jarring. I started to literally forget the person and not recognize the person that had apparently inhabited my body and my mind for so long. Yeah. So I called my friends, you know, texted my friends, said, I'm not coming out. Because at this point I was collapsed on my floor, unsure that I was going to be able to get up. It was a really, like I said, very unnerving place to be. And I started to Google stuff, and I started to go on YouTube and start to read stories of people that I had already followed and folks that I already knew, you know, were out as trans. And all of a sudden I was seeing similarity after similarity after similarity in these people's stories. And it got to a point where it just made so much more sense than anything else. And I didn't sleep for the next 3 days or so. And it finally just, I just sat with that truth, with this possibility that after 28 years, more or less, I wasn't who I thought I was. Which is, it's terrifying. You know, it's really, 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 world shattering. Cause that's exactly what's happening. But that was the moment. If I can kind of qualify one exact moment that night, that experience of realizing I need to change everything. I changed everything that I could up until that point, and I still needed to change something deeper. And that was it. And, you know, I finally said the words, I am transgender, and it doesn't get less scary for like the first few months that you say it aloud. And then I did my research, I started down the path, and I, you know, visited doctors and all that. So yeah, that's, that's.
Wow. What a night.
Was a heck of a night.
We've all had some nights, but that's a night. Wow. Well, real quick,
I'm
had more people jump
rarely
in.
when I don't know how to speak.
Yeah, I know. I'm still trying to process what we just heard, because I can't imagine, because, you know, we've all had those nights where this outfit just isn't looking good.
Not me, but maybe you have.
Well, not you, but you're flawless. I mean, let's not even. I mean,
if you believe that,
I didn't want to brag on you too much in front of everybody.
I know.
Speaking of everybody, though, we want to thank those y'all who just jumped back in on the chat room. We got Addison in with us. Again, just speaking about her journey. And the story we just heard of her coming, I guess, to terms, you could say, with like, I'm not male, I'm transgender, like not just being, I guess, not being gay, like just coming to grasp with everything. So I've got two quick questions. One, to kind of just elaborate more on the transgender process, can you speak to people about like the procedure, the surgeries, what goes with that? Because you mentioned earlier, for those of y'all who weren't in, the hormones that you're taking. Is there a time frame? Is there just the steps that go along with it? Because I don't know all of them. I mean, we've talked to you a little bit about it, but it'd be better coming from you than me trying to pretend like I have a clue.
Sure. Sure. It's, again, very, very subjective. I would say the most common kind of first medical step is, it's HRT, hormone replacement therapy, which is used in general for a lot of different things, a lot of different conditions. When it comes to trans folks, it involves trans men taking testosterone, and when it comes to trans women, it involves taking estrogen primarily, and then there's also what are known as blockers, and these are used, it depends on how old the person is. So for somebody like me, I do take testosterone blockers, but it's a much different process for me because I already went through, a biological male's puberty. And so while the estrogen is kind of pushing my body through a biological female's puberty, I'm also actively trying to suppress the effects of, basically an ongoing production of testosterone, which my body naturally does.
Does that give you any sort of mood swings? The only thing I can think of, like, does your manner, your temper, your anything like that? How does that?
Sure. It changes everything. It really changes everything. There are kind of emotional barriers, I think, that hormones will put up, or lack of a certain hormones or balances, and those changed. Certainly the barriers, there were a lot of barriers that it felt like they kind of fell down after a certain while of taking estrogen. It definitely shows itself as, like you said, kind of mood swings and these kind of uncontrollable or very easily triggered emotions. There are things that it
being a woman, yes.
Yes. Solidarity.
They always say crazy, but I consider it being a woman.
I love it. I love my emotions. They run me wild, but they're great. And then there are things that it affects that you just have no idea that it's going to affect. Food cravings. I know it sounds like it's a cliche, but I promise you it's true. I stopped craving red meat. I used to eat red meat probably 4 times a week. And I literally just didn't even want it quite quickly. There's another one, which I also know that a lot of other women can relate to with hormonal imbalances, pickles. This is not a joke.
This is not a joke.
Yeah, I'm not joking. If you have a trans girl in your life and you need to get them a gift, get her a jar of pickles. She will love it. We all have a problem. We just eat them constantly. It's absurd. And real quick on that note, it's when we talk about these hormones, we talk about taking estrogen. Most women at some point in their life take estrogen in some form and some dosage, because it affects so many different, aspects of women's lives. And there are different things in our lives that can raise and lower those levels. So it is way more common than just in the instance of trans folks. We're just, again, kind of using it for a different end goal, I guess, in a way. But yeah.
Will you tell them when we
It's
talk
okay,
to
by the way, you can say perimenopause. It's okay. I'm okay with it.
Fair
I'm
enough.
not going through it, but I just wanted to throw it out there.
not you personally, but someone
Oh.
you know.
Yeah, somebody
Mhm.
who's very close to me that I know very well has to take progesterone.
Asking for a friend.
But what we were talking about the other day, I mean, we were speaking at the studio about the whatever was yours, but it's also described as a blood pressure medication. Am I thinking
Yes. Yes. So that it's called spironolactone, and it is a very recognizable name for a lot of folks, because it is primarily used as a blood pressure medication,
right?
and it can also be used to treat like really severe acne. It's like most medications; it's got a lot of usage. When it's taken in a certain dosage, of course, with a certain amount of regularity, it will actually start to block and kind of hinder the production of testosterone, which is exactly why I take it. When it comes to how long those hormones have to be taken, I'll be on estrogen pretty much my whole life. My body does not naturally produce estrogen. What it does naturally produce is testosterone. That will cease to happen once I have gender affirmation surgery, which I am very happily slated to have in 6 weeks from today, actually.
6 weeks.
6 weeks
Wow.
from right now.
It's going to happen here. It's going to happen here in Tennessee.
It's actually happening up in Philly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which is where you're from.
Which is where I'm from. And so, yeah, that is once, a part of that procedure is removing the part of the body that produces testosterone. So there will be no more need to take those blockers. And I want to kind of circle back to what I briefly mentioned earlier about when people take those blockers. For folks that realize this truth of theirs and realize their identities at an earlier age, prepubescent, when they take blockers, it can literally block puberty, stop puberty from happening. That sounds really daunting to a lot of people. It's not dangerous. There are pretty much zero risks about that. Everybody's first question when they talk about giving an 11 or 12-year-old, hormone blockers, puberty blockers, they think, well, you're deciding for this child's life. Again, first of all, the child is deciding. And then second of all, if that child realizes that is not their true self, and they go off those blockers, puberty will literally kick right back in. The human body there's a lot that is predetermined when we're born, and that is one of them. So it's a much lower risk, and that's part of why it takes so long. Those final kind of noticeable physical effects of hormones really aren't expected to come to fruition until bare minimum about 3 years, usually somewhere between 3 and 5. And like I said, then we're still on them right after that. But yeah, it's a really, really very slow, very, completely uninvasive process, so to speak.
What can you kind of elaborate on the, as much as you can, what the procedure will consist of, the recovery time? I mean, after any procedure, any surgery, there's always, like, whether it's a rehab or a PT or whatever it may be. Obviously, anytime there's sort of any like cutting being done, there's going to be some sort of post-surgery things. Can you just kind of like explain a little bit more what that is, or what?
Absolutely. Yeah. So it is, the surgery is, it's commonly referred to as gender reassignment surgery, GRS. It's also known as gender confirmation surgery or gender affirmation, which is a vernacular that a lot of us just prefer because it kind of is exactly what it is. We are affirming what we've always known, what we've always been. And it for trans women, it consists of essentially several different procedures in one. They are sometimes done in different stages. I don't know how medically accurate we want to get here.
Accurate.
Okay.
Get accurate, because I think
Just give it all to him. Yeah.
Sure. The first of those, if it's done in stages, is what's known as an orchiectomy. And that is the removal of the testicles. That procedure can be done essentially by itself. And there are plenty of folks who elect to just have that procedure done and never have any more procedures regarding, gender reassignment surgery. That's the extent of it. Again, obviously that removes the part of the body that produces testosterone. So that's a big aspect of it right there. And that can really help to, quell people's dysphoria, and be done with it there. That's the one part of it. The rest of it really can't be done independently of any of the other remaining parts, which is essentially what's known as vaginoplasty and labiaplasty. And this is to take, and I know they do have the words plasty in them. These surgeries are completely natural. They are not plastic surgeries. It is 100% the person, essentially. But yeah, and that is to basically take what is there and rework it.
Wait, so they will actually, no, seriously, this is interesting. So they're actually going to take the skin of, I'm just going to say a penis, and actually rework it into a vagina.
Yes.
Oh, that's probably the most healthy way of doing it. You're basically taking your own skin, your own self, and recreating.
Yes. Yeah, it is. It is all you. It is. There's nothing foreign involved. And it's obviously come a very long way, but it's all, to preserve the natural existence of that patient. And it's a very long surgery. It usually is somewhere between 6 and 8 hours. It's also a kind of notoriously bloody surgery. So there's that. So there are a lot of risks. Potential complications, yes, but of course, the folks that are doing these surgeries, incredibly well trained, and everything, and the levels of preparation that one has to go through to kind of qualify for the surgery and to be a candidate are just so incredibly thorough. I've had to get every single sort of blood work done, every lab. I had to get a chest x-ray, an EKG. I've had to do laser hair removal. I've had to, I take iron supplements to prevent anemia, things like you don't even think of ahead of time. It's not a one and done by any means. And as far as the recovery goes, it's very long. It is, it's the better part of a week to 10 days before you can really get up and walk around. And we're talking even for like 5 minutes. You are basically just sleeping on your back, before then. But it's really 6 months to a year before kind of a level of normalcy is expected to return to the individual's life. Of course, everybody is different. Everybody heals at different rates. But it's a lot. And there is, Josh, I know you touched on kind of the idea of like PT, and there are physical elements to the recovery that need to be maintained, just because it's not plastic. It's not stable, so to speak. It's real, it's living, it's breathing.
Urethra, so that, I know I'm asking all very,
no, please. Yeah. That's exactly what happens. And that's what's also really fascinating about it is that I've long referred to it as a return to nature. All babies in the womb begin female. Every single human begins female. sorry guys, it's a mutation. Male.
You're
The male sex is a mutation. It's just a very advanced mutation that happens to affect a whole lot of people. But that's exactly what it is. And so that's why I kind of say it like that. It's a return to nature. They're taking what's there, what's kind of overdeveloped, and reworking it to what it should have been. Yeah. So that's what's going to be happening in a month and a half.
Surgery.
What's that?
Women, as they get older, they go through labia surgeries. And
Absolutely.
Vaginal surgeries.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's been around for years and years and years. But I mean, that's just minimal compared to what you're going to go through. Are you going to do it all at once?
Yeah, it is both my choice and I'm really sorry if y'all can hear this, by the way. There is a car alarm going off in the background, and it is great, phenomenal. Yeah, it is. It's my decision to go through it all once. It's also the practice of my surgeon, to not break up the process. Like I said, it's perfectly common to do so. It's perfectly safe to do it in stages. It is a lot of times a choice. It's a lot of times not. If a person elects to have gender affirmation surgery or some level of it, there may be an issue of accessibility, and they can't afford it, or they can't find the doctor to do it, or they medically can't go through it for any number of reasons. And again, all of that is to say that surgery of any kind, any procedure, is not a requirement for being trans. They are not always exclusive. And it's a huge misconception. It's, again, one of the first questions that a lot of times we get is, oh, so you're trans? Yes. Have you had the surgery?
Yeah.
I don't know. I had my gallbladder out. Is that the third surgery you're talking about? I haven't. I don't want to spread lies, but but it's my wisdom teeth out. Like, what are we talking about? That's so vague. And again, people think that those are always going hand in hand, and it's just not true.
I think it comes back to just being undereducated on the topic and situation, which is again why we are trying to have this conversation here. And
sure,
not that we're on a huge platform, but there's people are going to tune in, or they're going to jump on the podcast and download that, and just because they've got questions. And I think we've hit a big part, but we've only scratched the surface.
Yeah.
Can I ask one more question before you close, Josh?
Yeah, absolutely.
I know you're about to close because I know it's the top.
You don't know me like that.
But I have. But it's just because I'm curious, and I've always been curious. Once the surgery has been completed, when it comes to being able to be sexually satisfied.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh, okay. So I know where you're going. I think this is a good question, but I want to hold this. I want to do a second episode, and I would love to do this episode next Tuesday.
Okay.
Because I think we should hit topics like, okay,
I've always
after you had this surgery, what's the sensitivity like? What's a sexual preference? If people are gonna say, well, if you're transgender, who are you attracted to? Do transgenders only allowed to marry transgenders? Just like back, and we touched base on this before. And not to compare this, because I'm not one to be able to speak for anyone else, but segregation, when white people can only be with white people and black people can be with black people. And if you were Asian or Asian, it's are you transgender and allowed to be a transgender? You see a gay couple and you see a husband and a husband, well, is he not allowed to be with a transgender? So I think there's a lot of questions that we can dive into.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there's a lot of depth we could get. So I like your question. I literally was just about to send you on the side chat, hey, here's what I want to talk about next week.
Hush, Cat, because I know you're about to go for 2 more hours.
I mean, it's quite the cliffhanger to leave them with.
It's we could go preference, who you've dated, dating
sure.
all those things. I think that would be great. And the thing is it's people have questions, they just don't. And they want to know. They're just nosy. People are just nosy. I mean, people want to know about, each other's personal lives, no matter if you're.
No matter what.
Yeah,
Right.
like, oh, so what's going on with your personal life? Oh,
Yeah.
you didn't get the article of "It's none of your damn business." Oh, I forgot to say. But
There was an email about that. Yeah.
There was, and it must be in your junk mail. It must be in the junk mail. But
I will say, yeah.
But go ahead. Yeah,
Oh no, I was just gonna say real quick. You mentioned the concept of trans folks only dating other trans folks. We do love to, we call it T for T. And I'll just say it makes it really easy because like halfway through that second date, we're like knee deep in childhood traumas, and it just makes the connection really easy. Yeah. And we might not make out with our shirts off for another 4 months, but
I do that on the second date.
Connections are there.
Yeah.
I really hope there's some trans folks listening, because that is only relatable to certain people. Yeah.
But I also think that
first date, parent issues. Second date, we're married.
We're married. We'll file for adoption papers. The
non-linear timeline.
We're good. But I think that would be good. I want to talk to you about that. I want to talk to you about Dwayne Wade and his child are being 13 and coming to terms with I'm born Zion, and I'm a woman, and Gabrielle Union and Dwayne Wade being who they are, and being supportive, and then they're getting backlash from some of this hip hop community, from people who are just trying to, like, I think people who are saying things that are still just ignorant to facts. And so I want to like kind of touch base and get some of those opinions. And then, but I also, like Kat and I were talking, we're going to have a dating episode, but the dating episode later down the road is like, for women in Nashville, women who are, 30s and above that are professionals and have put their personal life on hold to focus on their career, and how it's difficult because what's the ratio? 10-1 now in Nashville, women to men. And if you're 22 to 32, it's great to be single. But if you actually want to have something serious, it's about that 32, 33, 34, where you've kind of fallen into where you're at for your career. But then you turn around and look, and there's not that Prince Charming, so to speak, that's there. Yeah. So it's like, how does dating work? And dating just being a difficult thing. So I think that'd be something to be fun to kind of touch base on. If you're free to do next week, I think that would be.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I would absolutely love to. I mean, there's just, and we mentioned, before this, just constantly more and more things to unpack here.
Like I said, we've scratched the surface. And there's so many things. And I think that once people hear this and download the podcast, which is on iTunes, and listen to it, email us your questions, like DM us our Instagrams are going to be tagged to this. Anything you have, because I think that some people are just, they don't know what to ask, or they have questions, but they don't know how to present them. So it's like, this gives them time. It's like when you say, hey, where's somewhere nice to eat in town? And you're like, well, I can tell you in an hour, but if you ask me on the spot, I got nothing. Yeah. So I think it's one of those things where they have time to sort of like ponder on it. Okay, sure. Next week. So so anyone that's listening to the podcast or here, write your questions down. Email them, DM us, however you want to do it. But to wrap up, to completely change topics altogether, we like to do a thing at the end of each podcast, asking guests, who are the top 5 people, alive or dead, you would love to have dinner with?
Oof.
Yes.
Okay.
Alive or dead. They can be alive or dead.
Yeah, I see you every day, and I forgot to prep you for this until just now.
No, I love it. Oh gosh. Okay. Laverne Cox.
Yep.
Trans activist, actress, incredible human. Robin Williams.
Oh, I miss Robin.
That's the first person who said Robin Williams. That's good.
Yes.
Yeah.
But Robin Williams, which character would you like Robin Williams to play at dinner?
Oh yeah, well, I guess we got to limit it because he'll just riff otherwise. Yeah. Oh man. I would I would love a Mrs. Doubtfire. I'm just
I
gonna
knew it.
Mrs. Doubtfire is the one.
Yeah, I know that's a little on the nose for
But
me. It's like I'm
only
putting
if
a
she
hat on a
puts her,
hat.
only
but
if he puts his face in the cake for dessert.
yes.
Either that or
pops up like,
birdcage.
Yes.
Oh, the best.
Birdcage with, I can't remember his
So
name.
yeah, I would love a Robin Williams as Mrs. Doubtfire. Obama.
Yep.
Um,
one.
that's a 50-50. I'll take Michelle or Barack, actually.
Yeah, they're a partner. They're coming together.
Yeah, either one. Oh gosh.
I know you want to say me, but you already have dinner with me, so it doesn't matter. You can't.
We have a standing reservation,
Yeah.
Josh. It's not, yeah. Oh man. This is tougher than I thought it would be.
Yeah. It's.
Yeah.
You got two more.
There's a poet and an author named Saul Williams. He's alive. He's living. And he's just a really famous kind of slam spoken word poet. Really incredible activist. I would love to meet him and pick his brain.
Which is also something I want to pick your brain on next episode, is about your poetry and your things that you want to do. Do you find yourself as someone who is now can use themselves as an example to help other younger people who are kind of confused? And I think everyone kind of goes through a sexual confusion, whether it's like, I'm a boy, do I like a girl? I'm a girl, do I like a boy? Am I supposed to like boy? Like when they're just confused and they don't know. But that's also, I would like touch base with that next week. But okay, you have one more. Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. This is gonna get just kind of. I don't mean to end on like a sad note. I would my father. My father died when I was 17 years old, and I think that would be great.
Yeah, no, I'd love that one. My dad passed away a few years back, and I would definitely love to have like one more meal with him. But I was a little older whenever mine passed, but at least at that age, you got to know yours.
Yes,
to a certain extent. So I think that's great. I think.
Yeah, exactly, and it's so. In a lot of ways, I've said in writings and such that it's there is a level of unfamiliarity there because I wasn't out, and there's a lot of that. But I would really like that.
I think that'd be great to talk about is like presenting it to family and parents, and how sometimes people feel more comfortable with friends than with even their own family because of.
We didn't even talk about that. That's
like I said, there's so much more that we can dive into next week, but there's also, like I said, questions people are going to have and more questions to come up with. So that'd be awesome to do next week. I'm excited about it. This is hands down been the one show, like all the other shows have been great, but this was the one that I was looking the most forward to because there's so much we can discuss. And then I'll even kind of throw in next week, like my spin on like working at Barry's like we have for the last 7 years and coming from a small country town, growing up in a little trailer park kind of thing and being taught one thing. And as you get older, having to learn to unteach yourself things that you were taught, not necessarily wrong, but like, the people that taught you didn't know any better either. So as you get older, you have to learn to kind of think for yourself a little bit, but I think that'd be something we can touch base on too.
Definitely. Yeah. And I know it's Music City Fitness and, we didn't get into that too much, but yeah, I would love to also, and hopefully there's questions about that. If there are, more than happy to address those about just, my own fitness journey and how hormones affect that and all these other things. I mean, it's just
also another
the chapters continue to write themselves. Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to be on like chapter 4.
Chapter 4.
Yes.
I'm all for it. I'm all for it. Well, Addison, again, thank you very much for coming and being part of tonight.
Thank you.
Awesome. It means the world to me. You just decided to jump on. Kat, get better. You did great. I know you're a little under the weather. It's going around. Everyone's catching something out here this last month, it seems. But
it's so much fun. But it's not the coronavirus. Great. I just want to put that out there.
Thank God for right now.
Amen. Right? I shouldn't even. I didn't mean that as a joke.
There you go. See, now you're just jinxing yourself.
I did not. Hold on. Knock on something. Wood. No.
Well, thank everybody who tuned in. We appreciate you again. If you can go to the YouTube page, like, subscribe, go to the iTunes, give us 5 stars. If you give us 4 stars, I assume it's an accident.
Yes.
Write review, but only positive thoughts. But next week we'll do it again, 7:30. Let's knock it out. Episode 2. Any questions y'all have, please feel free to email us, DM us, anything you have. We'll tag our IGs at the end of this as well. But awesome. Thank you guys.
Thank y'all so much.
We'll see you next week.
Addison, you're awesome.
You are.
Best. You are.
Thanks for joining us on Music City Fitness. We had a blast, and thank you for all your questions. Come hang with us next week, same time, same station.